for the honor of inviting me to this most important event. I'm going to take speaker's privilege, which I think a Senate confirmation vote allows me to do once in a while, and sort of flip the script. The first thing I want to say is that we are losing a great friend in the United States Senate. Some of you may have read that the chairman of our Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, Johnny Isakson from Georgia, will be leaving the United States Senate in December to go back home to Georgia to recover his health. And I want to say, in a time of great division, that Senator Isakson represents the best of what we should be, and that is a decent, incredibly decent patriot who takes time to listen to all sides, but believes with his whole heart that America is best when it takes care of those who have taken care of America. So on behalf of the Department of Veterans Affairs and on behalf of the President, I wish Senator Isakson the best of luck in his future endeavors and wish him good health. So thank you for indulging me for a minute. I'm going to actually start these remarks from where I was going to end it. This is a call to arms. We are at a crossroads in this country when it comes not only to treating and helping those Americans who have borne the battle, but we are at a crossroads when it comes to treating and helping an entire nation. We are here to talk about veterans, those representatives of the 41 million Americans who have borne arms since the first shots were fired at Lexington in 1775. But America as a country has to come to grips with what you all deal with on a daily basis. We had better have a conversation about life in America, or the things that veterans experience on the same day will overwhelm our country. And that is why we have a great opportunity here. We have an opportunity to lead the nation. I have been tasked with charge of the President's Prevent Task Force on Suicide. But I will tell you what many of you already know, that if we just focus on the last tragic act in a veteran's life, this will be another federal report that no one will read, and its best use will be as a doorstop in the years ahead. If we do not focus on mental health, if we do not focus on addiction and homelessness, that continuum of issues that often leads to that last tragic moment in a veteran's life, we will be doing a disservice to those veterans we care for and a disservice to the memories of those millions who have come before. But the solution is here. In fact, it's staring me in the face. It is you all. A few years ago, this conference garnered 500 Americans. That's it. And that was the extent of the participation across the country. Today you represent thousands, and I imagine that in 2021 there will even be more of you. The most definitive answer that we can give to our fellow Americans and to our veterans is that this is a task that we will all conquer together. You may have heard me say in previous speeches that we are not even at the Sputnik stage when it comes to discussing mental health in this country. But just as the nation came together And 12 years after the Russians lost Sputnik and we landed a man on the moon, we are coming together now to tackle this problem. And just like the moon launch, Americans will overcome this great tragedy. But let me put into perspective what is happening in the rest of the country and why I think that the focus on suicide amongst veterans is the key to unlocking the solutions for the rest of our citizens. In the last few months, we have heard about the loss of a dozen New York City police officers. Just last week, my Air Force colleagues at Shaw Air Force Base in Sumter, South Carolina, shut the base down because of the loss of so many airmen. When I last testified in front of the Senate Appropriations Committee, that day, the New York Times and National Public Radio ran stories about a 30% spike in teenage suicides amongst those young Americans who had watched a TV show called 13 Reasons Why. Ladies and gentlemen, if we do not offer a way forward for the American people, then we will not only have done a disservice to our veterans, we have done a disservice to our country. Most of you probably know that every day 20 American veterans take their lives. About half of those veterans are over the age of 65, and most of them are from the Vietnam era. Let me put that into perspective. Lyndon Baines Johnson left Washington, D.C. 50 years ago in January, and we are still dealing with the effects of that terrible conflict. That was my father's generation. And in those days, veterans and those in uniform, men and women, who began to feel the mental strain of service, kept it to themselves. They didn't tell their families what they were going through. They certainly didn't tell their superiors what they were going through. And they had to fight alone when they returned home to the country that they had sworn to defend. They fought the battle alone. In the last few years, we have seen an interesting cultural change take place. The burdens that our veterans have borne are now being borne by non-veterans. And suddenly, veteran suicide is now debated in a much broader context. People who talk about this tragedy can quickly find themselves talking about partnerships, about how to work with others to identify those who are at risk, get them the help they need, and find solutions that keep people out of the risk zone in the first place. We at the Department of Veterans Affairs are happy to be part of that conversation. And we picture the work being done on this issue as a series of circles. The innermost circle describes what VA is doing on veteran suicide. But we're surrounded and supported by broader circles of people just like you who are working with us to solve this problem. A shorter version is the theme of this conference: many roles and one mission. Within our department, we are offering as much help as we can to veterans that we see. Today, the Department of Veterans Affairs screens every veteran who comes to us for mental health issues. Since the beginning of the fiscal year, October 1st of 2018, we have screened well over 1 million American veterans. And of those veterans, we are closely following more than 3,000 on a daily basis who have given us indication that they may try to harm themselves. We are providing same-day mental health coverage and offering emergency services for those with an other than honorable discharge if they come to us with an immediate need for care. And we're using innovative programs like ReachVet that analyzes the health record data to identify at-risk veterans so we can offer them preemptive care, and in some cases, before a veteran has that last terrible thought. But this problem is bigger than any one department, and the numbers bear that out. Of the 20 veterans who take their lives every day, VA is only caring for 6. So we're reaching beyond our walls, and the first concentric circle is our work with the Department of Defense. One change that was too late for my father's generation is an effort to talk about this more within the military. As many of you know, before I was honored to become part of your family, I served as the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness under General Mattis. We had long discussions about the changes in military culture, the changes from my father's generation, the changes from the generation that General Mattis had walked into when he began service in the Marine Corps in the 1960s. The old way of not talking about these problems is giving way to an open discussion about mental health amongst our service members. We have told our servicemen and women that the most important thing that they can do is not only look out for themselves, but look out for those that they serve with. We at VA are working closely to ensure that newly discharged service members are aware of and have access to mental health care for at least 1 year following their discharge. We're doing that on the direct order of the President of the United States, who told us in January to get this done. This conference is another chance for VA and DOD to come together, compare notes, and coordinate the way forward. But this problem is even bigger than the 2 largest departments in the federal government. And that's why President Trump has given us an even bigger circle by signing an executive order that calls for a national strategy to reduce veteran suicide. As I mentioned earlier, I chair the Prevents Task Force along with the White House Domestic Policy Council. And I'm proud that President Trump made our department the tip of the spear in this effort. And I'm pleased to tell you that over half of my cabinet colleagues are now in this fight. We have an important chance to focus on something beyond the act of suicide. As I said earlier, the factors that so often lead to those terrible moments: mental health, homelessness, and addiction. One result that I expect is a new template for how we can get resources to you, to states and localities, and to charities, non-governmental organizations, to help us find those 14 veterans who are taking their lives every day that we at VA do not have contact with. There's an important bill in Congress that I want you all to take a look at. It's sponsored by Senator John Bozeman of Arkansas and Lieutenant General retired Jack Bergman, the former commander of the 4th Marine Division, who now represents Minnesota. It would let VA direct grant funding to you, to the states, to the charities and the non-governmental organizations, so that we in America can better find those veterans in need. President Trump supports that way of delivering care to our veterans, and passing this bill is essential to our outreach efforts. Many of you here will be involved in growing partnerships, and we're optimistic that we can make progress because we've seen this kind of cooperation succeed when it comes to veterans' homelessness. Right here in Tennessee, Chattanooga and western parts of this great state have effectively ended veterans' homelessness by making it rare, brief, and non-recurring. They got there by coordinating all of their resources, the resources at their disposal, and by directing veterans who are homeless or at risk of losing their homes to housing programs and help with jobs. We have shown that we can work together to keep veterans in their homes, and now we need to show veterans that we can help them save their own lives. The biggest concentric circle then is the one that encompasses the entire country, in part because we can all play a role in the struggle, in showing the struggle that veterans undergo. How we allow veterans to come back to the brotherhood of arms and to the family of their fellow warriors. But also because this tragedy of suicide is not something that is only consuming veterans. As I mentioned earlier, this wave is crashing in on all of us in the United States and globally. And we simply will not have any success at any level until, as I said earlier, we finally have a national conversation about life. That goes beyond the scope of government. That goes beyond the scope of any government program. It must involve families, caregivers, friends, and neighbors, and it must involve other veterans, the only ones among us who can talk about the value of life as a peer to veterans who are in trouble. So, what can be done immediately as we approach National Suicide Prevention Month? You can help publicize the Veterans Crisis Line, your workplace, 1-800-273-8255. Every day, we receive 1,700 calls on that crisis hotline, and every day we act on 200 or 300 calls to immediately intervene. That is the first step in the triage that you can help us. You can help us make sure that everyone in the public knows about. You can contribute to the awareness campaign about mental health resources and suicide prevention resources in your state with your local governments. You can promote the safe storage of firearms, something VA is already working on with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and the National Shooting Sports Foundation. And you can help us to talk openly about the importance of speaking about mental health. So I'm going to close with a story that was a favorite of my father's. My father was a gravely wounded combat soldier. I saw the horrors of Vietnam made manifest in my own family. He went to Vietnam 6'2", 240, and after a year recovering in an Army hospital from wounds from Cambodia, he came back to us weighing 120 pounds. And it took him many years to recover, but he recovered enough to go back to the All-American Division, the 82nd Airborne. And his great hero was Matthew Ridgway, the commander of the All-American Division who had led the division to victory in North Africa and in Sicily. And sadly for General Ridgway, he was not allowed to parachute into France to begin the assault on Hitler's fortress Europe on the morning of June 6, 1944. General Eisenhower made him plan it. But because he had planned it and he couldn't jump in, he could not sleep that night, and he actually fell out of his cot and was very disturbed. So he reached up for the Old Testament, and he pulled down the book of Joshua and started reading about what was then the greatest battle in the history of the Hebrew people. And he looked to God's promise to Joshua on the eve of battle, where he said, "I shall not fail thee nor forsake thee." And in 1986, Ronald Reagan gave General Ridgway the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and he said, "Heroes come when they are needed, but great men and women step forward when courage seems in short supply." That's what you all are about today. You are about making that promise that General Ridgway quoted so often about not failing nor forsaking those who have made sure that the world is safe and America is secure. And it's also about helping those great men and women who have always stepped forward when this country needed them and always stepped forward when courage seemed in short supply. So I thank you. I thank you for everything you do. I thank you for everything that you will do, not only for our veterans, but for the future well-being of all of our citizens. So I thank you. God bless you for everything you do, and thank you for honoring me by having me here.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Ladies and gentlemen, next, the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, the Honorable James N. Stewart.
Little did you know you were going to have Jimmy Stewart here today, did you? You would have paid money, right? No, thanks for honoring me, for having me here today, and for following a great American like the Secretary of the Veterans Affairs, Secretary Wilkie. You know, he was the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness and is currently serving as a reserve colonel in the United States Air Force. So I want to thank him for everything that he did in preparing me for the job that I'm doing now, because I am performing the duties of. I'm actually the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, but performing the duties of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel Readiness. I want to thank our Secretary of Defense and our Deputy Secretary of Defense for their leadership and dedication to address suicide in our armed forces, and for their focus on the service members and their families who really do ensure the strength of our Department of Defense family. It's an honor to be here with all of you, our DOD personnel who are here, our colleagues in the VA, and all who are dedicated to our sacred mission of ensuring the well-being of our service members, veterans, and their families. From my early days in ROTC at Auburn University, through 37 years on active duty and in the reserves as a flyer, a staff officer, and as a commander, I witnessed firsthand the sacrifices that our service members make, and most importantly, their families. During my time as a commander, I had an opportunity to talk to young airmen about their goals and aspirations, and it was one of the most rewarding aspects of my career. When America called, these brave men and women, they were ready to put aside their personal ambitions and put their lives on hold and put them on the line for each and every one of you. Now we must ask ourselves, how can we do everything within our power to help and protect those courageous souls who did everything their nation has asked of them? And that's why I want to thank each and every one of you for your tireless dedication in confronting this most important issue of suicide. Your efforts on suicide prevention are so important because suicide decimates lives, their families, and their units. For every statistic, there is a real human being behind the numbers, their friends, their families, and fellow service members who love them. Unfortunately, I think most of us here have had to deal with suicide in some way or fashion. I personally have experienced it when a fellow airman took her life in my unit. I was the commander of that unit, and it had a tremendous impact on the unit in every single way. Rather than focusing on the mission, what consumed us was, how had we failed? How did we miss it? We thought we had the tools, we thought we had the training. How did this happen? How did we not pick up on the signs? This is why it is so urgent that we come up with the tools to help our teammates. Now, when I'm invited to speak at different events, my remarks usually focus on how our service members tackle some of the toughest jobs, the most technologically challenging missions in the world. I discuss our people within the context of the national defense strategy and the threats such as China and Russia, as well as the advanced weapon systems we have to deal with, such as cyber, artificial intelligence. However, at the center of everything that we do within that strategy, within the Department of Defense, is people. They're our strength. Today, I want to focus on them. There is a tremendous responsibility in taking care of the physical and mental well-being of our service members and their families. But I know that that is a responsibility we are all willing to share in. Everyone in this room is on the front lines to help stop suicide and to end this tragedy. One suicide is too many, let alone the alarming numbers we're seeing today. Now, let me be clear. Suicide prevention within the Department of Defense is one of our top priorities. People is our business. We cannot do our mission, protect the nation, without people. Not only because it affects our missions, but more importantly, it's our responsibility to take care of our people. We hope that we never have a mother, a spouse, a brother, a sister, a college friend, battle buddy receive a call that their loved ones died by suicide. The department is absolutely committed to this effort. We know the issue is complex. We know that no two individuals have identical experiences in life. Suicide prevention must address many complex interactions and many, many factors, both protective factors and risk factors. That's why the Department of Defense has taken a comprehensive public health approach to suicide prevention. In recent years, we've created the Defense Strategy for Suicide Prevention and issued our first ever policy on suicide prevention, both of which help us to guide us and strengthen our programs and efforts and serve as the foundation for future improvements in critical mission areas. In the military, we all recognize firsthand the importance of teamwork. Suicide prevention is no different. We work to ensure collaboration across multiple offices, the uniformed services, federal agencies, and our community partners. Additionally, our efforts to improve transition include establishing a military to civilian transition period that begins 1 year before separation or retirement, providing comprehensive, standardized, and individual assessments across the departments, and identifying and addressing gaps so that we can advance health benefits and support to service members as they prepare to enter civilian life and receive the care from our partners over in the Veterans Administration. Now, at the national level, Secretary Wilkie addressed it in his remarks. The President has signed 2 executive orders focusing on suicide prevention for transitioning service members and veterans. The first executive order, issued in January of 2018, requires the secretaries of the Department of Defense, Veterans Affairs, Department of Homeland Security to collaborate and ensure our transitioning service members and our veterans have a seamless access to mental health care is needed. Suicide prevention resources during the first year and retirement and separation is necessary because that's an increased risk period. March 2019, the President signed another executive order, the President's Roadmap to Empower Veterans and End a National Tragedy of Suicide, or as Secretary Wilkie called it, the Prevents Initiative. This executive order establishes an interagency task force which includes not only the Veterans Affairs, Department of Defense, Health and Human Services, and Homeland Security. Our task is to develop a comprehensive public health roadmap to improve the quality of life for military members and veterans and to help in the area of suicide, to end it. Now, I understand that both executive orders were discussed in plenary sessions. These executive orders are having a positive impact, but have a long way to go. And we'll continue to work together to prevent the tragic loss of life. Now, as we gear up for Suicide Prevention Month, coming up in September, many of you may have heard the key themes of the Department of Defense. Small steps save lives. Small steps. As I've said, the front lines are so critical, and each and every one of you are on those front lines, and it is so critical precisely because that's where each of us can take those small steps to make a difference, to stop this. It's also why this conference is extremely important, so that all of us from across the nation can take new ideas, new initiatives to implement and to take it back home with you. To not only work from the community level, but also to enable individuals to recognize potential warning signs and to know how to intervene. Suicide is a national public health issue, and your impact is so critical. As leaders and as practitioners, we know that stopping these tragedies requires so very much more. Your impact not only helps to save lives of those who would otherwise not be alive today, but you also touch the lives of their loved ones, those friends, those family members, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, and most importantly, their children. While every single person in the Department of Defense has an obligation to take those small steps to be there for one another each and every day, those of you in this room, the leaders, and that's what you are, as leaders in this area, have a larger role in developing the resources and the tools to make a difference in the lives of those who need them the most. With your engagement and leadership, we are all better able to connect service members, their veterans, and their family members with the resources they need and they deserve. To help stop this tragedy, to help our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marine, Coast Guard, men and women recognize the warning signs, to help those in need realize that they can step forward to get help, and that we will be there for them whenever they do. So, like many other efforts we undertake in the department, there have been some successes, but lots of challenges remain. Never forget that any success in suicide prevention is accomplished on the front lines with each and every one of you. Thus, I encourage each of you to use the knowledge and the ideas shared at this conference, along with the tools and the resources to combat suicide at home, in your workplace, and in your communities. We need your help. Can't do it alone. Department of Defense is huge, but can't do it alone. We need your help. All of you are leading the way. Thank you for your resolve, for your firm commitment, and for your dedication to this very important mission. And thank you very, very much for inviting me today to speak to you. Thank you.